Hello everyone, welcome back to module 2 on engineering materials under engineering chemistry B. Myself Dr. Chandrasekhar from the division of chemistry S&H. Last class we saw the syllabus for engineering materials. Under that we saw refractories. In that we discussed the different types of refractories present under classification, and in today's class we will be seeing some of the properties of refractories, right. So we are not going to cover the entire properties of refractory materials, but we will select few properties which are going to be interesting for study, right. Under this we will see refractoriness under load, we will see thermal behavior, and we will see porosity and chemical inertness or corrosion. As I mentioned earlier, so these are the things, properties which are going to focus today. One is porosity, that means the ratio of pores present in the system for a given volume, and refractoriness, that means how much the material is going to withstand, that we are going to see, and how much heat a material can withstand under pressure, that means under a load or under a working condition, that we will see under refractance under load. This will be given as RUL, and we will be seeing the density of a material which is also going to affect the refractory, and we are going to see different thermal behaviors, right. Here I have mentioned two: thermal stability, thermal spalling, and there is also called conductivity and thermal shock, right. So these four we are going to see in today's class. Along with it we will see the chemical inertness or the corrosion behavior of the refractory material, right. So these are the things which we are going to cover today. So moving on with the first one, porosity, right. Porosity, you can see the images of this, and this is a brick which is having porous structures in it, and this is a cross section of this porous material where you can see the pores which are connected or interlinked among them, right. Okay, so the definition for porosity, it is a measure of the effective pore size present in a material. What is the effective pore size present in a material or in a refractory, right, and which all these things can pass through it or diffuse to it, like the molten metal or a slag or the fluxes, whatever change is happening, vapor or liquid, everything, whatever can penetrate into these pores, right, and thereby they will contribute to the degradation of the entire refractory material. Okay, porosity is a measure of the effective open structures or porous structures present in a system, right, which will enable these things to penetrate, like the molten metal, slag, flux or vapors, to penetrate along the material, and which will contribute to the degradation of the material. Okay, so from this we can understand that if the porosity is less, all these things, penetration will be lesser. If penetration is lesser, then the degradation will also decrease. So lesser the porosity, better will be the structure of the material. More the porosity, lot of things can penetrate to it, and more degradation can happen, right. So this is about porosity, and these are some of the things which porosity alters, right. With increasing porosity, the thermal conductivity is going to decrease, right. So with increasing porosity, if the size is going to be bigger, the space is more, in this space more and more air can penetrate to it, and air is considered to be an insulator. Because of this, the thermal conductivity will decrease, right. Okay, so with increasing porosity, the thermal conductivity will decrease because the pores can occupy more amount of air, and air is considered to be an insulator. Because of this, the thermal conductivity will decrease. Second one is the permeability increases. More the size, more things can flow, as I said in the first slide or in the first paragraph. So more bigger the size, more and more materials can pass through it or penetrate to it, so the permeability increases. And third one, the temperature fluctuations reduces as pore can accommodate the thermal expansion of heat, right? So temperature fluctuation reduces, the same explanation whatever I said for thermal conductivity applies here also. The fluctuation reduces because of the air getting trapped into those pores, so that is one. And the last one is the strength reduces due to decreased compactness, right? More the porosity, the strength also decreases, and thus these are the some of the characteristics of porosity, either increased or decreased one, right? So moving on to this next slide. Decrease in porosity increases the strength and thermal conductivity. If you closely observed whatever I said earlier, so here decrease in porosity, that is smaller the porous size, the strength is going to be increased. The porosity, decrease in the porosity increases the strength and also the thermal conductivity, right? So these two properties increases with a decrease in the porosity, which is more essential for a refractory. So right, okay, and high porous materials tend to be highly insulating, that means bigger the size, more air trapped into it, so the insulating behavior will also be high. So high porous material will show high insulating property. As I said, it will result in high volume of air inside the pores, and since air is considered as a thermal conductor, so poor thermal conductor, the insulating behavior decreases, right? And the third sentence, because of this reasons, the low porous materials are used in hotter zones, right? Remember, low porous means there is no way of the material to move out, right? And there is no insulating property also, right? So because of this, these materials are used in the hotter zones, whereas more porous materials, which has got a bigger air packets or more space, they are used as thermal backup materials, okay? So where it can be used as an insulators. So this will be insulator, right? And this will be, it will contain the heat. For example, if you take an oven and which is made of refractory materials, right? If you remember, if you follow my earlier class, these refractory materials are used in the lining of ovens, and that lining can be either singly lined or it will be multiple lined, right? So here we have a multiple lining of your refractory material in an oven, right? And so the inner one will have less porosity and the outer one will have high porosity, right? This less porous refractory material is going to contain the heat into it, so that loss of heat will be minimized. The reason why less porous material are used at the inner line is because it will contain the heat efficiently. There will be minimal loss of heat. If loss is very less, then the heat will be contained in it. That will give you an efficient refractory property, right? So that's why the inner material is made of less porous and the outer material is highly porous, because the heat whatever lost here, it should not pass through the material and come out of it. So in order to avoid that, these are used as insulators, so that the heat cannot penetrate to it and the whole oven can be safeguarded, okay? So this is the reason why most of the ovens are multi-layered and each layer will have a different porosity, right? As in this case, the inner one will have low porous, whereas the outer one will have the higher porous material. Okay, so this is about porosity. Right, moving on, one second. Right, so you can see this image here. You can see the porous material over here and you can see the arrows penetrating into it, right? So if there is more pores in it, there will be free movement of all the things whatever moving here, and this can be used as a better insulator. If more porous the material is, more air can flow into it, and if more air flows into it, then it can give you a better insulating property, right? So this is one image. You can find different images in the internet if you are not okay with this image, right? Moving on to this simple equation where you can measure the porosity. So porosity is the ratio of the pore volume to the bulk volume. So it is a simple equation where it connects the pore volume and the bulk volume. Okay, so what is the volume of the pores present in a material plus the volume of the entire bulk material? A ratio of that will give you the porosity, and this is given by this equation. P is equal to W minus D divided by W minus A, where W is the weight of the specimen, okay, weight of the specimen, your bulk material, and D is the weight of dry specimen, okay, so it is under dry condition, and A is the weight of the saturated sample in water. Okay, so three things. One is the weight of the sample, and the second one is weight of the sample in dry condition and weight of the sample in water. So these three things are used to calculate the porosity, and this is the equation which is used, where P is equal to W minus D divided by W minus A into 100. So using this equation you can easily calculate the porosity of a material, and all these all these things can be easily measured using a balance, right? Moving on to the next slide. And the second property which you are going to see is refractoriness, right? Refractoriness. Okay, so refractoriness, this is the second property. I have given the definition here. So refractoriness is nothing but the ability of a material to withstand higher temperature, right? So it is the measure or ability of a material to withstand higher temperatures, right? At higher temperatures, these materials should not deform. Okay, the temperature up to which the materials cannot deform is termed as refractoriness. Okay, or in other words, it is the temperature at which the material can deform. Okay, so the second one is given here. Okay, so the first one, the refractoriness of a material is a measure of its ability to withstand exposure to elevated temperatures, that means higher temperatures, without undergoing any appreciable deformation in the material, right? So this is the ability of a material to withstand very high temperatures. So that is refractoriness. And the second one, it is the temperature, right? So the same thing in a different form. It is the temperature at which the material softens, right? So up to one temperature it can contain the heat. Once it crosses that temperature, it starts deforming. So the temperature at which the material starts deforming is called the refractoriness temperature. Okay, so it is the temperature at which the material softens, and hence the measure of fusibility of the material. The temperature at which the material transforms or deforms or gets fused is the temperature of this refractoriness. Okay, so there is one thing with this fusibility. Okay, so refractory materials are mostly made made by using different materials, which we saw in the earlier class, where silica is used, alumina is used, or chromate is used, manganese is used. We use different kinds of components to make a refractory material, right? So because of this mixture of materials, the refractoriness will not be a single point, or it cannot be a sharp melting or sharp melting point. Okay, so because of mixture of materials, we will not have a sharp melting point, right, because of mixture of materials, right. So the appropriate term which we can use for refractoriness is fusibility temperature range. Okay, so the term fusibility I said, right, since the refractory material is not made of a single refractory material, since it is used by mixing more number of refractory materials like silica, alumina, calcium oxide, manganese and all these things, you will not get a single fusion temperature, you will get a range of temperature in which these materials starts fusing. So that's why we can use this term called as fusibility temperature range for refractoriness. So refractoriness, we can say it as the fusibility temperature range, right. So impurity in the material will reduce the refractoriness. That means more and more number of material if you are going to add to make a refractory, it will reduce the refractoriness, which is not good for a refractory material. And usually the refractoriness is indicated by PCE, right. Usually this refractoriness is denoted by PCE. PCE is nothing but pyrometric cone equivalent. Pyrometric cone equivalent, right. So PCE is nothing but pyrometric cone equivalent, and we will see in the next slide what is that, right. So pyrometric cone equivalent. So these are the cones which I was saying. So these are all the cones, right. Using this, they are going to determine the pyrometric cone equivalent. So it is given here. It is determined for a material by comparing your sample with a standard sample. Okay, so it is determined by comparing the degree of slumping, the degree of melting or the degree of fusion of the test sample with a cone made of standard material. Okay, so you are going to compare the fusing point or the melting point or the fusing temperature of your material with a standard cone material. Okay, so if you compare these two and if you see at what temperature your material starts fusing, and if the standard material also fuses at the same temperature, then you can take the number of this cone as the pyrometric cone equivalent. Okay, so it is determined by comparing the degree of slumping, that is fusing, of the test sample with a cone made of a standard material, the temperature at which the cone melts or fuses and touches the floor, making a 30-degree angle like this, right, or this, right. So this is the unfused one before the start, and this is once the temperature starts, and you can see slowly this cone starts melting and touches the ground. So the temperature at which the cone melts and touches the floor and which makes an angle, specific angle, right, is noted, and the standard cone equivalence, right. Similarly, a cone of different composition is started melting, and the cone which makes the same melting at that fixed temperature is taken as the pyrometric cone equivalent. Okay, so two different materials you need for this. One will be your standard material, one will be your sample material. First they will fuse the sample material, and at one temperature it starts fusing. That temperature will be noted, and these standard materials, there are different standards which will melt at different temperatures. You have to check at what temperature which of the cone number will start melting. So the number of the cone which melts at that particular temperature is taken as the pyrometric cone equivalent number. Okay, so this is another image. So these are the cones, and this is how it will be made, and this is after the fusion is done. Okay, so using this, the numbers, whatever standard number they have used, that will be taken as your pyrometric cone equivalent. Okay, right. So usually pyrometric cone equivalent use two different standards, okay, two different standard materials. One is based on a German standard, okay, which we call it as Sager cones, and the other one is a British standard which we call it as Orton cones. Okay, preferably most of the people use this Sager cones instead of Orton cones, right? So these are the two different standards which are used to measure this pyrometric cone equivalent, and the numbers are numbered according to their fusion points. So this table you can see here, this is the cone number and this is the temperature at which those cones starts melting. Okay, so you take one number and it will melt at a particular temperature. If you take your sample and if it starts melting at around 1500 degrees Celsius, that means you can see the cone equivalence. It will be between these two, 1500, either the pyrometric cone equivalent will be either 16 or 17. Right. So based on this standard you can calculate or you can check the pyrometric cone equivalence. Here you can see here, right. So if the cone number is less, right, lesser the cone number, the temperature is low, right. You can see here also. So the cone number increases and the temperature also increases. So smaller the cone number, lower the temperature at which it fuses, higher the cone number, higher the temperature required to get it fused. Okay, so lower the number of cone, lower temperature is required, and higher the temperature, higher energy is used or higher temperature is used. You can see here cone number 12 is equivalent to 1337 degrees Celsius, whereas 42 it goes to 2000 degrees Celsius, right. So this is one which you people have to remember, right. Moving on to the next slide. So sorry for the poor resolution of this image, right. So this is to classify based on the refractory 4 different types. One is low heat duty, which has a pyrometric cone equivalence from 19 to 28, right, and which will be in the temperature range of 1520 to 1630. Usually silica bricks are used. Silica bricks are made of SiO2. Okay, and intermediate heat duty, low heat duty, first one, intermediate duty, which will be in the range of 28 to 30 pyrometric cone equivalence, and the temperature range will be 1630 to 1670, and it is mostly fire clay bricks. Fire clay bricks are nothing but alumina plus calcium oxide, right. So those are all fire clay bricks. And third one is high heat duty refractory, which has a PCE of 30 to 33, and the temperature ranges 70 to 730, and chromite bricks are used, which will be Cr2O7, right. And superheat duty refractories, where it will be greater than 33 PCE, the temperature range will be more than 1730, and usually the refractory material used is made of magnesite MgO, right. So this is one classification of refractory materials based on the refractoriness. It will be low heat duty, intermediate heat duty, high heat duty, and superheat duty, right. So these are the different materials which are used, and this is the pyrometric cone equivalence or range for these different materials, and this is the temperature range, right. Moving on to the next slide, and here we will be seeing the other property, which is refractoriness under a load. Okay, so under pressure, under working condition, how this refractoriness changes. What is refractoriness? It is the ability of a material or the temperature at which it starts fusing, right. So this fusing temperature, whether it is changing or not during the working condition, and at what temperature it does, that is measured using this refractoriness under load. Okay, so RUL gives an indication of the temperature at which the refractory collapses when a refractory is functioning under service load. Okay, so this will give you an idea at what temperature the refractory will start fusing if it is sorry. So RUL gives an indication of the temperature at which the refractory collapses when the refractory is functioning under service load. Okay, so this will give you the temperature at which the refractory starts melting when you are going to load or when you are going to simulate in such a way the refractoriness experiences the same work as when it is fixed in a real life refractory oven. Okay, so this is the temperature at which the material starts fusing under a working condition, right. So this is a simple instrument which is used to measure the RUL. Here you can see the refractory material, and this refractory material will be put in this dome and the temperature will be increased, and this will be connected to a weight, right, and this weight is the force which is be loaded to the material, right. Under that external force, what will be the material's refractoriness, right, that will be calculated using this instrument. Okay, so as per the standards, the when a refractory undergoes a softening or breaking, when a load of 2 kg per centimeter square is applied, is called as RUL. As per definition, the temperature at which the refractory material fuses when a load of 2 kilogram per centimeter square is applied is called as RUL. Okay, RUL is measured at a working condition, and that working condition will vary, but as per standards that working condition will be equivalent to a force which will be exerted over the material when a 2 kg material has been forced on it. Okay, so this is the RUL calculation, and usually the mixture of refractory, okay, usually a mixture of refractory will deform at lower temperature. If there is a mixture of material, then you will not get a single fusion, but because of this impurity, the refractoriness decreases. So if there is more mixture, more number of materials are there, if more impurities are there, the temperature will be lesser and you will get temperature which is lesser than the PCE cone, right. So PCE will give you one temperature. Since more mixture is used in a refractory, or if more impurity is there, you will not get the exact PCE temperature, you will get a lesser temperature than this PCE. This is because of the impurity present in the system. Okay, if you are going to use an exactly a pure metal similar to your cone, then you will get very close number compared to your PCE, right. If there is an impurity, it will have a lesser temperature than the PCE or pyrometric cone equivalence, whereas when a refractory is made of pure material, it will have close values with respect to RUL and PCL. RUL is nothing but refractance under load, and PCE is nothing but pyrometric cone equivalent. Okay, right. Moving on. So the fourth property, which is nothing but your bulk density. Okay, so bulk density, it is a measure of the weight of a given volume of the refractory. Measure of the weight of a given volume of a refractory. Okay, so it is the measure of the weight of a given volume of a refractory. For a specific volume, what is the weight exerted? That is given by this bulk density, and this bulk density is the amount of refractory material within a volume. Okay, the same thing put in a different form. It is the amount of a material present in a fixed volume. Okay, the earlier one is the weight of the material of a given volume. Here, what is the amount of the refractory material in a given volume? Both are more or less the same. Okay, it shows the amount of a material which is used to make a specific volume of a refractory material. So that is called bulk density, and an increase in bulk density of a given refractory increases its volume stability, heat capacity, and resistant to slag penetration. So this you have to compare it with your porosity. Okay, so if the density is going to be high, okay, an increase in the bulk density, that means there won't be any pores, there won't be any gaps, and if there is no gaps or anything, the permeability, permeation or penetration will be decreased. That is one. And the heat capacity increases. That means it is not going to leave, or it is not going to allow the heat to pass through it. So heat will be contained to it. So the heat capacity will be increased, and it will also increase the volume stability. Okay, so these are the advantages of having a very high bulk density refractory material. Okay, right. And the fourth one is bulk density is measured as the ratio of the mass of the refractory specimen to the bulk volume of the same. Okay, so the bulk density is a ratio of the mass of the refractive specimen to the bulk volume. Okay, so you can take it as bulk density is equal to mass divided by your bulk volume. Okay, so it will be put in a different form. I will show it in the next slide. So bulk density is the ratio of the mass of the refractory specimen to the bulk volume, or in other words we can say it as weight per unit area or per unit volume. It is the weight per unit volume. Okay, so it is calculated using this ratio, which is a ratio of the mass of the material to the bulk volume of the material, or in other words we can put it as the weight per unit volume of the refractory will give you the bulk density. Okay, so the porosity is important to have better insulating and dense refractory properties. Okay, so this bulk density is highly important because it is going to have a better insulating and a dense refractory property. That is why bulk density is very important, where it will have a better insulating property as well as the refractory property will also increase. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, there are two ways of measuring this bulk density. One is direct measurement method and the other one is direct volume determination method. Okay, so it is direct measurement method. Equation is here. You just weigh the material and calculate the volume. You get the bulk density, where it is given as weight of the specimen in grams divided by volume of the specimen, right? So it will be BD is equal to weight in grams divided by volume in cc, right? That will be your direct measurement method to calculate the bulk density. And we can also use this direct volume determination method. Okay, and the equation is this one, where the dry weight is calculated and the material is soaked in a water and its weight is calculated, and based on that you can get this equation. So dry weight divided by soaked weight minus suspended weight. Okay, so that will give you the exact volume of your material. Okay, from that volume you calculate this bulk density. Okay, so one is direct measurement method and the other one is direct volume determination method. Usually people prefer this direct volume determination method because it gives a better and an accurate value compared to your direct measurement method. Okay, so this is used, right? So moving on to the next property is thermal properties, and under thermal properties you got all these things. We have conductivity, thermal conductivity, thermal diffusivity, thermal expansion, thermal shock and thermal spalling, right? All these things are going to affect the efficiency of the refractory. Okay, under thermal properties we get all these things. One is thermal conductivity, thermal diffusivity, thermal expansion, thermal shock, thermal spalling, and all these things are going to affect the refractory. We will go one by one, right? So first one is thermal conductivity. It is the ability to transfer heat. Conductivity means moving from one place to the other, right? So movement of or transport of anything from one place to the other. So it is the ability of the material to transfer heat. Okay, so you can see this image here. One side is very hot and the other side is cold. So the heat flows from one direction to the other direction, right? So and this can be calculated as the quantity of heat flowing through a unit area, right? So thermal conductivity is measured with this one. It is the amount of heat which is flowing in a specific area, or here we put it as unit area. So it represents the quantity of heat flowing through a unit area in a fixed time at a known temperature gradient under steady state conditions. When all the conditions are maintained constant, what is the amount of heat it is flowing or moving from one end to the other end? So that is given by this heat thermal conductivity, and it is calculated using this simple equation, right? And K is your thermal conductivity. K is your thermal conductivity and Q is the amount of heat transferred. Delta T is the change in the temperature, T2 minus T1, and L is the length of the material, okay, and then T is the time taken, right? For a fixed time, for a fixed length, and for a fixed area, what is the amount of heat flowing from one end to the other end is given by this thermal conductivity. So this is a simple equation which is used to calculate thermal conductivity, right? And thermal conductivity, it depends on the composition of the refractory material, that is the chemical and mineralogical composition, okay, and this is related to the composition of the brick, the porosity of the brick and pore size, right? Thermal conductivity is dependent on the chemical constituent of it, right? And this chemical constituent can be the composition of the brick or the porosity or pore size, right? So these are the factors which controls thermal conductivity, and thermal conductivity will be higher. Thermal conductivity will be higher when the refractory material used is having a single element. When a refractory material is made of a single element, at that case the conductivity will be very high because there is no impurities in it. So conductivity will not be stopped. So impurities are not there. So conductivity will be very much higher, right? So for pure materials, the conductivity will be higher, whereas in a mixture of materials the conductivity will be less. You can see here graphite, which is nothing but carbon, okay, which is a single element, right, has got high thermal conductivity, whereas beryllium oxide, silicon carbide, boron carbide, those are mixtures, their thermal conductivity will be very, very less, right? Compared to this it will be less, whereas the atomic weights are same for this one. So they will have a same thermal conductivity. So compared to here, the conductivity will be more. Compared among all these things, this will have the same thermal conductivity. Okay. So this is about thermal conductivity, and this is different materials. You can see a pure metal iron which has got a thermal conductivity of 28, whereas magnesia, which is made of MgO, has got a thermal conductivity of 4.4. and the other mixtures like alumina, Al2O3, so it is having 3, whereas pure iron, it shows a thermal conductivity of 28. A single element will have higher thermal conductivity, a mixture of element will show lesser thermal conductivity. Okay, right? So the second one under thermal property is thermal diffusivity, right? This is a very simple one. It is the measure of the ability of a material to conduct thermal energy relative to its ability to store, right? So with respect to storing, how much heat has been delivered or how much heat has been transferred, that is given by thermal diffusivity. It is the ability of a material to conduct thermal energy with respect to its ability to store thermal energy. Apart from its ability to store energy, how much it can transfer, that is given by this thermal diffusivity. Okay, and thermal diffusivity is the thermal conductivity divided by specific heat capacity and density, okay, at constant pressure, which is given by this equation, right. K is the thermal conductivity and C is your specific heat and rho is your density, right. So, thermal diffusivity is measured or calculated using this equation, which is a ratio of thermal conductivity versus heat storage capacity. Whatever I said here is the same thing. So, thermal conductivity versus heat storage capacity, and this heat storage capacity is given as a product of specific heat into density. Okay, so using this you can calculate thermal diffusivity, and the other property under thermal property is thermal expansion. It is the thermal stability of a refractory when it is exposed to different ranges of temperatures and then cool to room temperature. Okay, you heat a material and bring back to its room temperature, whether you see any change in the material, that is given by this expansion, right. This expansion can be of three types. It can be linear expansion, it can be area expansion, or volume expansion. Okay, when you heat a material and bring back to its normal room temperature, whatever changes happened with respect to the length, the area, or the volume is given by this thermal expansion. Okay, any material heated and cooled, the change in the all these three parameters like length and breadth, area and volume is given as thermal expansion. These are the equations which are used to calculate thermal expansion for linear change. So, if this is the material which is heated and once it is cooled, so this area will be the expanded area. Okay, so this length instead of L, now it will be L plus L dash, right. So, this is the region of L dash, right. So, this is called thermal expansion, right. The same thing applies to area expansion also, where the area starts increased, and volume expansion also the same thing, the volume of the material starts building up, right. So, this is thermal expansion, and these can be calculated using these three equations, right. And thermal expansion depends on bond strength, right. So, this is dependent on bond strength of the atom, two different bonds, ionic bond and covalent bond, and as we said, refractories are mostly ionic in nature, right. So, with more ionic bonds, thermal expansion increases, right. If there are more and more ionic bonds, thermal expansion will be more. You can see more expansion. With more covalent bond, thermal expansion decreases, right. Higher the ionic nature of the material, expansion will be more. Lesser the ionic nature, lesser will be the expansion, or higher the covalent nature, lesser will be the expansion, right. So, this is about thermal expansion, and the next one is thermal shock. Thermal shock is nothing but when a material is heated, and if that material is cooled very fast or suddenly, and because of this rapid change in the temperature, the material might undergo a shock. Because of this shock, the material might change its shape or some deformation can happen. Okay, any material when it is heated and when it is cooled, when the cooling happens very spontaneously or very rapidly, this change in the temperature, instantaneous change in the temperature will affect or will deform the material. That deformation is called as thermal shock. Okay, so it is the fracture of a body resulting from thermal stresses induced by rapid temperature changes. Okay, rapid temperature changes. If there is a very fast change in the temperature, because of this very fast change in the temperature, there will be a shock. Okay, there will be a deformation of the material. Okay, thermal stresses occurs on the surface during cooling when the temperature difference between the surface and the interior of the component. Okay, so this happens at the surface, especially at the interface of the material or interface of the lining, where if you take here the lining, right, so this one, it happens mostly at this point at the interface, because this will be hot and this will be cold, and when this hot and cold match together, there will be a rapid change in the temperature at the interface. Because of this, there will be a crack produced between this one. If once crack happens, the refractory material cannot be very strong. Okay, so this happens when there is a temperature change, and this temperature change we call it as thermal shock. Mostly it happens on the surface, right? And thermal shock can be indicated by the number of cycles to withstand such temperature fluctuations. So this thermal shock will be given by a number, and that number is calculated based on how many times, how many cycles this material can withstand a change in temperature, right? How many times this refractory material can withstand a thermal change or thermal variation is given by this thermal shock. So thermal shock can be indicated by the number of cycles to withstand a temperature fluctuation, right? So this is about thermal shock, right? Moving on, so this is an image of a thermal shock. This is a normal cup, whatever we use, right? Whenever we pour a very hot material, sometimes if there is any deformation in it, it starts cracking, right? This is what happened in a cup. The crack penetrated, here also it penetrated. This happened because of the thermal shock, because a sudden change in the temperature made the refractory material to deform, and that deformation was in the form of a crack. Okay, right. The next one is spalling. All the things whatever we saw collectively is put as spalling. So spalling is defined as the fracture of the refractory material due to any of the following changes, like temperature change or compression change or variation in coefficient of thermal expansion, right? So because of these three things, the fracture of the material varies, and that fracture of material is called as thermal spalling. Thermal spalling is defined as the fracture of the refractory material when it undergoes any of the three, like change in the temperature, change in the compression, or change in the thermal coefficient. Because of these things, when a material undergoes a fracture, that we call it as thermal spalling, right? And the next property is specific gravity, and specific gravity is a ratio of the material's true density with respect to a standard material's density, and that standard most of the time will be water. Okay, specific gravity is the ratio of the true material's density with respect to the true density of water. So that ratio is given as specific gravity. It is given here, density of the object divided by density of water. So this will give you specific gravity, and this specific gravity is highly important because the strength of the refractory material is dependent on it, right? The strength of the refractory increases when the refractory material is having higher specific gravity. Higher the specific gravity, higher the strength of the material. Okay, if the gravity is more, if the density is more, it will be highly compact, no permeation, the thermal conductivity will be less. Because of this, the strength of the material will also be higher, right? So the porosity has to be connected to it, the density has to be connected to it. Both these things, when you connect, you can understand this. So the specific heat capacity, the specific gravity, the specific gravity of the refractory, if it increases, the strength of the refractory will also increase. Okay, so this is about specific gravity. And the last one is chemical inertness. Okay, or otherwise you can say it as corrosion, right? When you see when we saw the classification of refractories, we had one classification based on the reactivity, that is about acid, base and neutral, right. Acid is made of acid refractory, it is not good for base material, and basic refractory are not good for acid, and neutral will be good for both acid and base, right. A refractory should be chemically inactive, it should not react with any of the components whatever used, and it should not form any fusible products, any byproducts with the slag or the ash or the furnace gases. Whatever byproduct formed, it should not react. If the refractory reacts with that material, part of the refractory material will be removed, and that we call it as corrosion. Once slowly this refractory material goes off, then the strength of the refractory goes down. Okay, so it is always advised to use a specific refractory material which will be inert for the thing whatever it is intended, right. So for example, for an acidic refractory material you should use only acidic components. For a basic refractory material, use it for only base refractory basic material has to be used. If you interchange this, if you add base to the acid refractory, base will react with the acid refractory, and then the strength of the refractory will go down. So it is always advisable to employ an acid refractory for acidic products and basic refractory for basic products, right. Chemical inertness is nothing but deals with the corrosion, how a material is going to react with some of the products formed during an refractory, and something like slag, fuel ash or furnace, it should be inert towards all these things. If it is inert, then that refractory is called corrosion free, and for a safer side it is always advisable to use acid refractory for an acidic products and basic refractory for basic products, right. We will stop here and we will move on to the next topic, that is lubricants, in the next module. Thank you for watching. Thanks.